Thanks for joining us on Shannons Club TV, the program for all Shannons Club members and anyone passionate about their cars and motorcycles. Here at the club room you can join motor racing historian Mark Oastler and I as we take a close look at the rich road and race history of significant cars in Australia. We'll also meet their proud owners and get the latest market updates.
Today on Shannons Club TV we're hitting the road in a car that really defied the odds to become Australia's most unlikely automotive success story, the VW Beetle.
It might seem totally bizarre today, but Australia very nearly became the epicentre of the Volkswagen empire. The Australian government was invited by British occupying forces to relocate the entire Volkswagen facility to Australia after 1945 as war reparations. Because the Australian military had seen how effective the Cuba wagon was in the North African desert campaigns, it seemed like a really good idea at the time to build VW military vehicles for Australia's desert conditions, then offer the Beetle to civilians. Former GM executive Sir Lawrence Hartnett, after laying the foundations for the first Holden, was sent to the Wolfsburg factory to evaluate the VW Beetle as a second all-Australian car in 1947. He concluded that the relatively small Australian market was not yet ready for the car or its manufacturing processes. This notion of Australia becoming the new home for Volkswagen in the 1940s really highlights how World War II turned the world on its head. Mark, in hindsight, it wasn't such a bad idea. You can bet the last thing anyone was concerned about, though, was how successful the VW might prove in motorsport.
Oh, it is extraordinary. I mean, think about it. It had the aerodynamics of a teapot. It had the engine hanging right out over the back wheels. It had this fearful camber change on the swing axle rear end, so it was very, very dodgy in cornering and braking, particularly at high speed. So from the racing driver's handbook, it wouldn't have complied. However, it was very, very successful in a unique form of Australian motorsport for the very same reasons that the car appealed to Australian buyers too, and I'll get to that a little bit later on.
Well, while the Australian government stalled on a decision, the British occupying forces could no longer ignore how much Volkswagen was saving the war-torn British economy by making its part of Germany self-reliant. All threat of relocation was removed with VW's first export in 1949. Yet Australia did become the biggest manufacturer of VW Beetles outside Germany, if only for a short time. Australians embraced the Beetle on its arrival as an import. Its outstanding traction and high clearance, its air-cooled engine and general ruggedness prompted local assembly as early as June 1954. An Australian company had geared up to build a dramatic new suburban train design and now had the skills and facilities to build the Volkswagen. By 1964, the Beetle's local content was so high it had become the Australian car that was on offer in 1947 without uprooting the German factory. No other small car could match its ability to reach every corner of Australia and stay in one piece. Australian Volkswagens were exported to the toughest markets in the region, including New Guinea. It was even sent to Antarctica. Then Beetle sales stalled in 1966. Local Beetles had been isolated from vital annual improvements against unprecedented Japanese opposition. By 1968, it was all over. Volkswagen was then forced to fill the empty assembly lines with several of the Japanese models that ended its reign as Australia's most loved small car. Mark, the Australian Beetle story has all the intrigue and action of a real thriller, especially in the motorsport arena.
Yeah, and boy, didn't it deliver the unexpected.
Coming up, join us for a special edition of Sharing the Passion as we visit the VW Club of Victoria and find out more about their tribute to the VW Beetle. We'll also get the latest market updates with Hammer Time.
A successful competition career is not something most people would associate with the iconic first-generation VW Beetle. However, with its rugged, long-travel torsion bar suspension, high static ride height, simple air-cooled engine and flat floor pan, the quirky German car proved to be a brilliant competitor in off-road events. It seemed the rougher the conditions became, the better the Beetle performed. In Australia in the 1950s, the Beetles quickly became a dominant force in the popular Round Australia trials, winning the Red-X, Mobil Gas and Ampol events year after year. In fact, they became so dominant that they actually hastened the demise of these Round Australia trials. Joe, such mastery of these gruelling events by a single marque was unprecedented, and given the huge public interest in these events, it must have been crucial to Volkswagen's acceptance by the Australian people.
Well, after all, it started off as the German people's car. There was still anti-German sentiment. It wasn't that long after World War II. It was ugly, it was cramped, it was noisy, and it didn't have much luggage space, which was a big disadvantage for this country. So it must have had something going for it.
Yeah. The first generation Beetle's record of success in 1960s production car racing pales by comparison to its achievements in rallying, as the attributes that made it such a great off-roader were, as we discussed earlier, considered a major handicap on the bitumen. Despite this though, the Beetle did record two memorable achievements in production car racing in the early years of the Armstrong 500-mile race. The first was a class victory in the last 500 to be held at Phillip Island in 1962, when future Cortina and Porsche racing star Jim McEwen teamed with future Bathurst winner George Reynolds on a deteriorating circuit that resembled pretty much a goat track by the end. The VW Beetle's finest moment in great race history, though, came in 1963, the first year the Armstrong 500 was held at Mount Panorama Bathurst. It was during that historic race that the 1200cc Beetle, driven by Barry Ferguson and Bill Ford, became locked in a famous day-long duel with a Morris Mini 850 driven by Don Holland and Lindsay Little. Now, it was a tremendous tussle, with the class lead being swapped so many times between the two adversaries that they actually lost count. Then, in what became a must-see moment on live TV, the Beetle and the Mini arrived at the final corner on the final lap, locked together, until the Mini suddenly slipped and rolled within sight of the checkered flag. The VW powered across the finish line to win Class A after what had been a monumental battle. It was also the high point in the Beetle's Bathurst heritage, because the following year was the last time we would see one compete in the great race. If you're a motoring enthusiast like us, why not join the Shannons Club? Upload photos of your favourite cars, connect with other members, and have access to exclusive club offers. You can read the full road and race histories of our feature cars and catch up on past episodes of Shannons Club TV on the club website.
The VW Club's been going for 60 years in Victoria, renowned as being one of the oldest VW clubs, certainly in Australia, probably in the world. Being our 60th anniversary, we decided we'd take on a project, and that's why we picked a 67 Beetle to restore and donate to a charity.
When we decided to build this car, the couple of things the club wanted to do was to get more member involvement with the car and also to provide the proceeds from the car towards a charity. We've decided to give the proceeds to Cystic Fibrosis Victoria, a worthy cause, and all the funds will go towards that.
We found this car online, believe it or not, on eBay, and we were very happy with the condition. There was very little rust, very little damage. Probably one of the most notable things about it is it's never had any front or rear damage, which is pretty unusual for a car like this.
There was a few things that we changed from original. Certainly the colour. The car was white. We picked the colour which we thought would suit the car, which was Brunswick blue, and that was an original colour from 1967. It was a cabriolet colour, but it was a colour that was sprayed here in Australia. We converted the car to 12 volt, which means that someone know that it'll start every morning, know that the lights will be bright enough to drive on streets, which was a little bit of a drawback with the original 6-volt system.
The Volkswagen motor in this one is a 1600. It's another upgrade. It's almost impossible to bring the motor back to standard because no one buys 1300 parts anymore. It doesn't make it all that much more powerful, but it does give it a little bit more acceleration in today's traffic. You really need it. The same with the brakes. We made sure the brakes are in tip-top condition because, again, you have to be able to stop in time. This project really took us 7 months from go to woe, with a little bit of time at each end for faffing around, but in terms of actual hands-on hours, it was 7 months we got it going. One of the comments I had from a visitor on the day who's in the club, he said to me, I couldn't believe so many people are focused on one thing at once. And I thought about it, thought, yeah, you're right, it is a lot of people focusing on one thing, and we got the project done in record time. I don't think anyone could restore a car in 7 months.
The Volkswagen Club Victoria would like to thank the Shannons for their participation in our project, as well as our other major sponsors. And we'd also like to thank all our club members. Without you guys, we couldn't have done it.
Well, Shannon's National Auctions Manager Chris Borrabon joins us. Welcome, Chris.
Well, yours. How are you?
Hi, Chris.
VW Beetle. I bet you've seen a few of these things through there in your time.
We actually have seen a few come through in recent years, which has been great. Yeah, I mean, we've seen them from standard to modified, convertible, so yeah, a fair few come through.
So, Chris, the Beetles, there's something happening out there. There's some momentum and doesn't seem to be dependent on age group or gender. What's going on?
Look, I think the Beetle's, looking at it, it's a simple, practical and affordable classic. So it has captured the world's attention, similarly to what the Mini and the Model T did in their day. It's a great car.
So there's something universal about it.
There is, absolutely, yeah.
And a lot of people like to modify these cars, don't they, for competition, or also the dune buggies with the country buggy competition cars. How much does that affect their value?
I think it changes. I mean, there are people who definitely want the Beetles in the original form, and then we do see people who like to go down a modified route, whether it's superficial modifications or whether it's actually mechanical modifications, and going the whole way with them. But there's a really strong following around the club scene also in Australia for the standard Beetles and also for the modified type Beetles, whether it's a Beetle, whether it's a Type 3 or even the Manx buggies. I mean, they're a really good following here.
Well, thanks for joining us, Chris, and keep in mind you can keep up to date on all the latest Shannons auction news on the Shannons Club website.
If you'd like a memorable image of the VW Beetle for your own club room, check out the huge archive at autopics.com.au, Australia's most comprehensive motorsport photo archive.
And remember, you can read the full story of the VW Beetle road and race histories on the Shannons Club website. Well, Joe, what can we take away from looking at the VW Beetle? I guess it really was a car for its era, a car for its time.
That's exactly what it was. We had the T-model Ford that got people out of their horse and cart, and the VW Beetle put Australians on the road who otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford it. If you couldn't buy a Holden, because long 3-year waiting lists, they're more expensive, the Beetle was that interim car. Then, of course, the Japanese cars came along with all the appointments and equipment and filled the gaps that the Beetle couldn't.
It was amazing. There was a transition in the Australian car market. I remember it well in the 60s, where when the Japanese cars started coming in, the Volkswagen virtually disappeared very quickly.
You can actually see the sales just drop off.
Yeah.
1966, 67, and it was over.
Well, it certainly was an iconic car. And we hope you've enjoyed this blast down memory lane with the VW Beetle. We look forward to your company next time on Shannons Club TV. Bye for now.